They called them the untouchables. Human medics had crossed countless battlefields, patching up friend and foe alike with the same brutal efficiency that marked the rest of their species, but with a gentleness that no one else in the galaxy could comprehend. No treaties protected them, no written laws, just fear. Every species, from the smallest trader clans to the most brutal warfaring empires, had come to the same understanding. You do not harm Earth's medics. It was not because of rules or written codes. It was because the stories of those who had tried and failed had burned themselves into the bones of galactic history. Some of those stories were just whispers, passed down from one war fleet to the next. Others were carved into the ruins of civilizations that no longer existed. When human medics arrived, weapons were lowered. Borders were ignored. Generals offered them safe passage even in the middle of an ambush. They were healers. They were neutral. And humanity had never punished those who abided by that code. But not all species care for old stories. The Xeranthi Coalition saw themselves as beyond fear, beyond consequence. They were a rising force in the Orion Arm, their fleets thick, their armies vast. They viewed the stories about humans as overblown myths, relics of a primitive past. Their war council, swollen with victories over weaker systems, laughed at the notion that humans would enforce such a sacred boundary. They saw the medics as a tactical weakness, a mobile resource supporting enemy forces. In their arrogance, they captured a human medical vessel, ignored its distress beacons, slaughtered its personnel, and broadcasted the footage as a warning to those who would oppose their expansion. They wanted to show that no ancient rule would stand against them. Their mistake was not in harming the medics. Their mistake was in thinking that Earth would negotiate. For the first time in galactic memory, humanity said nothing. There were no broadcasts, no public condemnations. The usual diplomatic channels went dark. The Terran Union did not even acknowledge the attack. The galaxy, watching with bated breath, expected retaliation or at least a declaration. But Earth's silence was heavier than war. As days turned to weeks, nearby factions began to retreat from Xeranthi-controlled territories. Alliances crumbled. Trading partners vanished. Refugees whispered that Earth had invoked something older than armies, older than fleets. The stories resurfaced, stories that the young species had dismissed as legend. The Angels of Death. The first Xeranthi fleet disappeared without resistance. No battle. No survivors. Their long-range communications simply stopped. Search parties sent after them found only empty space where entire formations had been. Stations began reporting sensor glitches. Supplies stopped arriving. Key admirals vanished, their ships found drifting, intact but eerily silent. The crews missing. Panic crept into the Xeranthi leadership, but they clung to their arrogance, dismissing the incidents as isolated sabotage. They did not understand the pattern until it was too late. The strikes were not random. Every target was chosen with surgical precision. Supply lines collapsed in perfect sequence. Command structures were dismantled from the top down. The attacks came without warning, without sound, and left no evidence. Weapons were never fired in self-defense because the Xeranthi never saw the attackers until it was over. Entire battle groups simply vanished from existence. Fear gripped the Coalition's military as they realized they were being hunted. The hunters did not take prisoners. They did not respond to pleas. They did not issue demands. Galactic communication channels buzzed with desperate inquiries. Other species begged Earth for answers, but Earth remained cold and silent. In the shadows, the name spread like a contagion. Angels of Death. Those few who had survived brief encounters described black ships that moved as though physics had surrendered to their will. They operated without identification, without diplomatic tags, without signals. Their attacks were brutal but clean, leaving infrastructure in ruins while sparing no lives. They never announced themselves, but everyone knew who they were. The Xeranthi Coalition's attempts to retaliate failed. Their fleets scattered in panic. They fortified their core systems, But the black ships slipped past their defenses as though they were irrelevant. Entire sectors reported being cut off from communication, their relay stations destroyed in synchrony. As the attacks intensified, the Xeranthi High Command began to fracture. Accusations of betrayal surfaced. Commanders executed their own officers in paranoia. Sub-factions splintered. Even their allies abandoned them, terrified of being next. Desperation drove the coalition to seek allies, but no one answered. Even species that had once warred with Earth refused to intervene. They knew that Earth's silence was the only mercy left. One by one, Xeranthi colonies went dark. Communication outposts ceased transmission. Merchant fleets surrendered to nothing, broadcasting their unconditional capitulation to empty space, hoping someone might hear them. They begged for an audience, for negotiation, but the response was always the same: silence. A Xeranthi admiral, one of the last surviving members of the original War Council, attempted a final gambit. He assembled what remained of the Coalition's core fleet, fortified it with every defensive measure known to his species, and broadcast a challenge directly toward Earth. He demanded terms, pleaded for cessation, offered reparations. His transmission reached deep into human space. For the first time since the Medics massacre, Earth responded. One simple message: no emotion, no diplomacy. You harmed our healers. There is no negotiation. There is no mercy. There is only balance. The Admiral's fleet vanished within the hour. No wreckage. No distress signals. Only silence where his armada once stood. Panic swallowed the remaining coalition systems. Civilian planets began evacuating, only to find their escape routes already severed. The black ships always arrived first, waiting in the darkness, invisible until the moment they struck. They disabled engines with surgical precision, boarded silently, and left no survivors. In the outer systems, a pattern emerged. Black ships would sometimes arrive at colonies that had raised white flags. Those colonies were left untouched. The angels never set foot on them. They simply arrived, observed, and vanished. It became clear that surrender was not just accepted. It was the only lifeline. Entire planets began broadcasting their unconditional surrender to the void, not knowing if anyone was even listening. The galactic community watched in horrified fascination as the Xeranthi Coalition collapsed in a matter of months. Their vast empire, once feared, was now a hollow carcass. The angels of death had dismantled their power with surgical brutality, and they had done it without fanfare, without mass invasions, without conventional war. The question that echoed across star systems was simple. Why? Why did humanity choose this path? Why not wage a formal war? The answers circulated in whispered tales, in the testimonies of terrified refugees, in the fractured remains of intercepted human transmissions. Humanity had only one unbreakable rule: you do not harm their medics. The silence after the fall of the Xeranthi Admiral's fleet spread like a shadow. Every remaining Xeranthi outpost, every fortified planet, every scrambling commander understood that there would be no negotiations. They had not angered Earth. They had crossed something older, something absolute. Fear strangled communication lines as entire fleets transmitted surrender messages to no one. The angels of death were not responding. They never did. The human fleets operated with precision that defied all known strategies. They did not broadcast their intentions, and they did not accept capitulation directly. They moved with the cold certainty of natural law, targeting strategic lifelines with mathematical accuracy. The Coalition attempted to gather intelligence, deploying their most advanced scanners, but the black ships evaded every detection method. They were never spotted until it was too late. Their appearance was not announced by weapons fire, but by the sudden loss of entire facilities' commanders and fleets. Surveillance outposts began to report impossible anomalies. Black ships passed through heavily mined sectors without triggering a single device. They infiltrated fortresses that should have been impervious. In every instance, the pattern repeated. Key leaders vanished, command structures collapsed, and communication hubs fell into silence. The speed at which these events unfolded dismantled the Coalition's ability to react. The Coalition's desperation birthed erratic decisions. Rogue admirals abandoned posts, civilian colonies declared independence, and supply chains fragmented as surviving freighters fled toward the borders of neutral factions. Those seeking refuge in neighboring territories were turned away. No one wanted to risk proximity to a hunted species. The Coalition's pleas for assistance fell on deaf ears. Every major faction distanced themselves, recalling their diplomats, cutting trade ties, and severing all formal communication. To align with the Xeranthi now was to invite annihilation. The Angels continued their campaign without pause. They operated with such devastating efficiency that entire planets were isolated in hours. Satellites were obliterated, leaving worlds blind and deaf. Defense platforms that should have repelled entire fleets fell silent without firing a shot. The Angels' methods were unlike any warfare the galaxy had seen. They did not engage in drawn-out battles. They dismantled, disabled, and disappeared. Survivors reported the feeling of being observed for days before the inevitable collapse. No warnings, no signs, only the creeping dread of being the next target. One by one, the Coalition's largest shipyards were neutralized. Not destroyed, not bombarded, but rendered useless. Power grids shut down. Dry docks found their cores removed with surgical precision, and engineering crews vanished overnight. The black ships erased the Coalition's ability to rebuild, to resupply, to resist. They struck with such complete understanding of the Coalition's infrastructure that it was as if they had built it themselves. The psychological damage was catastrophic. The remaining admirals no longer trusted their own officers. Paranoia consumed their leadership. Entire fleets turned inward, suspecting sabotage from within. The black ships were often blamed for internal failures they had no part in. The Coalition's self-destruction accelerated as commanders executed suspected traitors, destabilizing their own ranks. The Angels exploited every weakness, dismantling relay networks, isolating high-value planets, severing logistical arteries. They calculated every strike to maximize the disintegration of command and minimize unnecessary collateral. It was not a war of blood. It was a war of precision. The black ships chose targets that would collapse entire sectors without firing on civilians. The Coalition's vast military was reduced to disconnected fragments, incapable of organizing a unified defense. Entire Xeranthi worlds began surrendering to empty space, broadcasting their total capitulation on all channels in the hope that the Angels would spare them. Some were left untouched, their infrastructures monitored but not dismantled. Others disappeared, the planets rendered lifeless without a trace of bombardment. No pattern could be found. The Angels chose what to spare and what to erase according to criteria only they understood. Attempts to track the black ship's movements failed. They appeared in multiple sectors simultaneously, as if ignoring the constraints of distance. The Coalition's best scientists could not understand their propulsion, their stealth, or their tactical precision. They began to believe the stories that these were not just elite soldiers, but something else entirely. Some whispered that the Angels were machines, a fully autonomous response system unleashed only when the sacred code was broken. Others believed they were biologically enhanced humans, engineered for one purpose. None of the explanations mattered. The result was the same. Coalition communications revealed increasing desperation. Leaders offered entire planets, entire sectors, as bargaining chips. They begged Earth to negotiate, but no reply ever came. The Coalition even tried to offer reparations to the families of the murdered medics, but their transmissions were never acknowledged. They were speaking into a void. Earth had delivered its message, and Earth had nothing more to say. The rest would be executed with unflinching precision. Attempts to hide failed. Coalition leaders fled to distant outposts, obscure moons, forgotten mining colonies, but the Angels found them. Black ships would arrive silently, disable planetary defenses, and within hours, the leaders would be gone. No battles, no pursuits, just erasure. Other species watched from a distance, terrified of the unspoken rules that governed this quiet war. The galaxy began to internalize the new reality. Human medics were no longer just protected by reputation. They were protected by the certainty of obliteration. Species that had once regarded humans as volatile but manageable now regarded them as an absolute force, bound by codes that were not to be questioned. Warlords who previously dismissed human neutrality now ordered their fleets to stand down at the mere sight of a human medical vessel. Fear rewrote policy. The Coalition's last remaining strongholds became fortresses of paranoia. Leaders trusted no one, fearing infiltration, fearing betrayal, fearing that the angels were already among them. Supplies dwindled as trade routes collapsed. Isolated outposts starved in silence, cut off from their crumbling empire. Their desperation became ritualistic. Broadcasts of surrender became daily events, directed to no specific human channel, but to the void itself, hoping the angels were listening. The final phases of the campaign were not about battles. They were about collapse. The Coalition's infrastructure rotted from within. Power grids failed. Transport hubs ceased to function. Entire civilian populations fled their worlds, fearing that staying behind would invite annihilation. Abandoned planets drifted into silence, their cities empty, their systems dark. The collapse of the Xeranthi Coalition did not come with a final battle or a grand surrender. It came in the form of disintegration, a slow implosion driven by terror, paranoia, and the cold efficiency of their hunters. The surviving fragments of their fleet scattered across the galaxy, leaderless and directionless, carrying with them the unshakable memory of what had been unleashed upon them. No remaining outpost, no hidden moon, no fortified planet offered safety. The Xeranthi had learned too late that they had not started a war. They had triggered an extinction protocol, and the price was irreversible. The Xeranthi commanders who escaped abandoned their identities, erased their records, fled into the farthest reaches of space. Some joined pirate clans, others sought asylum among distant neutral species, but nowhere was safe. Their faces became marks of death. Bounties were issued not by humans, but by terrified factions desperate to prove their loyalty to the code. Entire stations turned in Xeranthi fugitives, offering them up in silence, not out of greed but out of the desperate hope that by doing so, they would never see the black ships. The fragment of the Coalition dissolved into wandering nomads, forbidden from settling, chased from sector to sector. Other civilizations refused them entry. Planets fired on their ships before they could land. Even the smallest colonies rejected them. Their people became outcasts, hunted not by humans, but by the weight of their own decisions. They carried the mark of the unforgivable. The final remaining Coalition admirals, fractured and isolated, each believed themselves to be the last. Their paranoia drove them to madness. Some destroyed their own fleets in desperate bids to prevent infiltration. Others destroyed their own data cores, attempting to erase their locations, hoping that obscurity might offer protection. But the angels had already demonstrated that no distance was safe, no defense is sufficient, no hiding place beyond reach. The galaxy itself became the enforcer of Earth's silent code. Merchant guilds rewrote their charters. Neutral factions restructured their military doctrines. Even ancient warlike species, who had waged countless bloody campaigns, formalized the absolute protection of human medics in their laws. It was no longer a matter of courtesy or strategy. It was survival. When human medics arrived on a battlefield, hostilities ceased. Entire fleets disengaged, commanders ordered full retreats, and weapons were lowered without question. Human medics passed through war zones untouched, sometimes escorted by fleets from all sides, each desperate to prove they were not enemies. The protection extended beyond the medics themselves. Ships displaying human medical insignias were granted safe passage without challenge, no matter their origin, no matter their route. The fear that enforced this universal deference did not come from treaties or diplomacy. It came from what the angels had done to the Xeranthi. The precision of their campaign, the absolute finality of their strikes, had burned itself into galactic law. The memory of entire fleets erased without resistance, of communication networks collapsing in silence, of commanders vanishing without trace. These became lessons etched into the foundation of every species' strategic thinking. Galactic academies changed their curricula. New officers were taught the story of the Xeranthi as a mandatory subject. Tactical simulations no longer entertained scenarios involving hostilities against human medics. Even speculative models refused to calculate outcomes for such confrontations. The code was now written in fear, enforced by certainty. The former territories of the Coalition became abandoned scars. Cities crumbled. Spaceports rusted in orbit, and the few remaining outposts fell into silence. Scavengers avoided them. Colonization efforts failed before they began. The regions were marked as cursed, not by superstition, but by cold policy. No faction wanted to be associated with the lands the angels had erased. The void left behind was preserved as a warning, untouched, unclaimed, a memorial to the consequence of arrogance. Survivors of the Coalition's leadership became cautionary figures. Entire species adopted laws forbidding contact with known Xeranthi refugees. Governments refused asylum. Mercenaries declined contracts associated with them. The fugitives, isolated and hunted, eventually disappeared from the galactic record. Some believe the angels allowed them to vanish, not out of mercy, but as part of a greater punishment. Survival, alone and hunted, was a sentence harsher than death. Humanity never claimed responsibility. No official recognized the existence of the angels of death. Earth offered no statements, no public acknowledgement, no memorials for the fallen medics. It remained as silent as it had been during the campaign. The galaxy, however, did not forget. The name of the angels of death passed from one generation to the next, shaping the behavior of entire civilizations. Human medics continued their work, traversing battlefields, landing in war zones, treating wounded from all factions. The respect and protection they received became instinctive. No one questioned their presence. No one risked interfering. The memory of the Coalition's fate was enough. In the darkest conflicts, where hostility seemed unsolvable, the arrival of human medics became the catalyst for temporary truces, as commanders from all sides rushed to ensure the medics' unhindered passage. Entire war doctrines evolved around their presence. Armies refused to advance in their direction. Fleets adjusted their formations to create safe corridors. The fear of even the smallest misstep drove species to err on the side of overprotection. Accidents that harmed medics were punished by their own commanders before Earth ever learned of them. The galaxy now policed itself. Stories emerged, carried by soldiers and captains who had once been enemies. They told of black ships appearing on the edge of sensor ranges, of silent observers watching to see if the code was upheld. Whether those sightings were real or manifestations of fear no longer mattered. The possibility alone was enough to keep entire sectors compliant.